Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with a spooky Charles Coulombe.
Spooky? Spooky?
Yeah.
You mean interviewing someone like me is spooky?
Exactly like that.
I see. Uh, it's so sad. So sad.
What are you
So
doing?
spooky. Huh?
What are you doing?
I'm being spooky.
You're browsing the internet. We just started the show. What are you doing?
I am not browsing the internet. I was looking for niceness. You just said I'm frightening. And I looked for, you know what I was going to do? I was going to put out a bunny. I couldn't get one more quickly enough.
One of your, the saccharin poisoning bunnies?
Yes, the saccharin poisoning bunny. I mean, calling me spooky. You know, let me ask you a question, all right? What would you do if you were driving down a dark country road, all right, and it was raining? It's very, very dark. You see the moon, and that's it. No stars because the clouds are too thick. The rain is pouring down. And then your car runs out of gas. You're with me so far?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you get a newspaper or something to cover your head because you don't have any proper rain gear. Get out of the car. You walk up the road because you haven't seen any houses behind you. And you walk maybe a quarter of a mile in the pouring rain. And you see this huge old Queen Anne house with a light on in the tower room and a light on in one of the rooms downstairs. Are you frightened?
Yeah.
But you don't have a choice. Your car is stuck. Now, are you going to go to the house and see if you can get help? Or are you going to turn around and hide in your car until morning?
I would hide in my car until morning.
So that's the end of the movie.
Yeah. The people in these movies are always stupid. They always they make bad decisions. They literally, Geico even made a commercial on this. When you're in a horror movie, you make bad decisions. Save 15% or more on your car insurance or whatever.
Well, see, maybe if you'd done that, your car wouldn't have broken down in the middle of nowhere. But what I'm telling you is that you're telling me that rather than see what was in the old dark house with the two lights on in the pouring rain and asking to use the phone so you could call for a tow or something. I mean, maybe they're very nice people. You don't know. You've never been there. Haven't you ever heard the phrase, strangers are only friends you haven't met yet?
That phrase is stupid. Who came up with that one? Kidnappers?
I think it was the same guy that wrote the song "I'm the Friendly Stranger in the Black Sedan."
So you're telling me you'd go into the house?
Don't shift the focus. We're not talking about me.
Okay.
We're talking about you.
Okay. I go in the house. All right, continue the story. I go in the house. Okay.
Are you sure you want to?
Yeah, let's go.
You're not frightened?
No.
All right. You're about to knock on the door. You open up the creaky front gate. Obviously a run-down front yard. You're about to knock on the door when it opens of its own accord.
Okay.
You don't see anyone. Do you step inside?
Yes.
All right. You don't see anyone in the living room, although the light's up. You step into the middle of the living room and you see that there are cobwebs everywhere. The place is really not terribly well kept up, although obviously it was very, very beautiful at one point, and the furniture is all very old and very thick, and obviously it was a wealthy home at one time. You step in the middle of the living room, and then the door slams behind you, all by itself. Do you run back and try to open it, or do you go further into the house?
You go further into the house.
Really? You'd go further into the house?
Yeah. So now what?
Well, now you go into this big room. You turn the light on, and it's obviously a dining room of some kind, with a long table and disused candles, candelabras, and so forth. And then a voice from seemingly from out of the darkness of the next room says, "Please come in closer." Do you go to the next room that's dark?
Yes.
All right. Do you turn the light on?
Yeah.
Okay. You turn the light on, and suddenly a bunch of the employees at Tumblr House jump out and shriek, "Surprise! Happy Halloween!"
Wow. Wow. That's a good one.
Did you like that?
Reminds me of the movie The Game. You see that movie, Michael Douglas, Sean Penn, where
No.
it's like elaborate hoaxes for rich people?
No.
It's a good movie.
Wow.
But yeah, that's pretty good, Charles. Pretty good story there.
Well, in case you're curious as to how it was arranged, the motor pool put in, I mean, it was all prearranged, of course, before you took the trip. And the motor pool gave you only enough petrol in the car to make it that far. Now, see, aren't you glad you went into the scary old house?
Well, now I am, I guess.
Well, you had a Halloween surprise party you weren't expecting, now did you?
Yeah, that's nice. I'm glad.
See,
It all
called
worked
me,
out.
and you called me spooky.
Spooky is affectionate. It's not like terrorizing or something.
Huh. Well, at any rate, I'm glad you enjoyed your party. Did you save me any of the pumpkin pie?
I'm sorry, no. All the pumpkin pie is gone.
Fine. I wasn't invited anyway. I don't care.
So what's new? What's new in the special Halloween episode, Charles? Or what's new
Well,
for you?
lots of stuff are new for me. Firstly, and I'm very, very excited about this. The semi-lockdown that's afflicted here in Europe ensure that I'm not going to be going anywhere for my 60th birthday party. I'm going to be right here.
How do you feel about that?
It could have been a lot worse. I've had the sacraments all the time I've been here, which would not have been the case had I been trapped at home, as you know. I've got my classmates are a lot of fun. I have a lot of old friends in Vienna. So there are people even, closer in various places in Europe I was hoping to see, but that won't happen. Nevertheless, we'll manage. Although it is interesting, a good friend of mine just turned 60 last month. We're roughly the same age. And he said something which I thought was very true. There's a weird connection between your 30th birthday and your 60th. Because your 30th is the end of your youth, and your 60th is the end of your middle age. And now you basically do whatever you feel like doing. You know that it's the last third of your life you got ahead of you. So you want to invest it well. You want to spend it well. Leave a good mark behind you on your way out the door. And that I have to admit that's on my mind quite a bit. I think back to all the friends I've lost in the last 10 years, and it's a pretty sobering amount. Then, November being the month of the Holy Souls, you can bet I'll be thinking of them and praying for them. Because it doesn't matter where you are in that area. On Halloween night, what I'm planning to do, there's actually a store between here and Vienna called, don't laugh, Americandy.
Hmm.
And they stock all sorts of American candies. So, and it's in this huge mall. There's also a Dunkin' Donuts there. You'll be happy to know. So I'm going to gorge on all the donuts you've denied me. I'm going to pay you back tomorrow, pal. Yeah. Your reign of terror is coming to an end. But so when I have to go into town tomorrow anyway. But when I'm finished, I'm going to come back via the big mall and get some Halloween candies for my classmates. What I plan to do, the last 2 years, I did nothing for Halloween. But this year, especially as I've been trapped all this time, and I may not be able to get home for Christmas. I certainly didn't get home for the summer. I'm going to carve me a jack-o'-lantern. I'm going to set it outside this very door, and any of my classmates who come will get trick-or-treat candy, which I will purchase tomorrow at Americandies. I understand they're out of candy corn, but they have this candy corn and peanuts, which sounds like a weird concoction to me, but I don't care. It's imported directly from the States. So I'll load up on Halloween candy tomorrow, and on Halloween day itself, or Halloween night, Halloween day I'll carve the pumpkin. Halloween night I'll have my mini Halloween. I've already explained to the kids about souling, so they'll know that if they take my candy, they've got to pray for my dead. It's that simple. That's the deal. You don't want to pray for my dead, you don't get any lousy candy. That's the way it works. Sorry. No exceptions. Act now while supplies last, quite literally. Void were prohibited. No CODs. You've got to pray immediately.
What if they're not Catholic though? Isn't that coercion? Isn't that intolerance?
There aren't any non-Catholics here. So
okay. So it's not. There's really no diversity in Austria.
No, there isn't. In fact, I'm as a member of the Knights of Peter Claver, I'm the closest thing they've got to an African American. So they've got a couple of Africans.
Wait, they've got a couple of Africans, but
From
you're
Africa.
the closest. So you're closer to an African American than the Africans.
Oh gosh, yes.
Okay.
Culturally, let me tell you, despite everything, culturally, Black Americans are far more American than they are African, and not least because the contributions they've made to American culture that we all have tied us together all the more. Jazz is not really a thing in most of Africa.
Got it.
But at any rate, so that's my plan. And then on All Saints and All Souls, I'm going to go to the True Mile Cemetery and pray for my own dead scattered around America and Europe. And then on my birthday, November the 8th, I know what I'm going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do. In the morning, I'll go to the Byzantine liturgy. I'll go for a big goose lunch at the Café Vess with some of my classmates. Then I'll go into Vienna for the Tridentine Mass and go out afterwards with the usual gang. And that's how I shall celebrate my 60th birthday.
Okay, sounds nice.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping to go to Ireland and England around this time, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're hoping to take advantage of people around the world. Throw me a party.
I was absolutely positively ready to take advantage of everybody, but the COVID monster put paid to that. So everyone's going to have to take care of themselves. They're going to have to honor me in their own way, in the privacy of their own home. So, like, let's say, ladies and gentlemen, that you live in Cape Town, South Africa, and it had been your intention to send me a ticket to come there for a week of frolicking at the Cape. All right. I would have gone, depending on the dates, because, I would have given a month over to my various birthday celebrations. Unfortunately, I can't make it. So, what I'd suggest you do is get together a group of friends at your palatial home in Cape Town, or maybe Vancouver, BC, St. Louis, Missouri, Rio de Janeiro, wherever you happen to live on this wide world of ours. throw a party in my honor for my 60th, which is November the 8th, but it doesn't have to be on the exact day, although it is a Sunday. You could do it on the 7th, or really any time within the week on either side. Throw a birthday party in my honor. Take pictures, even videos if you want. Send them in, and we shall show some highlights from my around the world party.
Okay.
How does that sound?
It sounds wonderful.
Yeah. Now, mind you, you and I won't be able to enjoy any of the food or booze, but we will be able to see other people around the globe enjoying themselves on my behalf. And that, actually, as I'm sitting here, I'm not even joking, that would be a wonderful way, ladies and gentlemen, to give me a very happy 60th birthday and usher me into my dotage. That would be great, actually. That'd be really great. In fact, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, that would be really fun. That would really pick up my spirits. Now, I neglected to mention something. My birthday is the 8th. There's something going on the 3rd of November. What is it? People are talking about, especially over here, right? St. Hubert's Day, I remember. The Great Feast of the Hunters, November the 3rd, St. Hubert's Day. And there, around here on this date, they have these Hubertus Messen, masses of St. Hubert, with hunting horns providing the music of the mass. And yes, this goes back long before Vatican II, just so you'll know. Now, the thing about hunting horns as music, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's kind of like bagpipes. You like them or you don't. Really and truly. I love bagpipes. I love hunting horns. A lot of people can't stand either one. And then some people like one, not the other. It's okay. It's diversity. We accept all kinds. But at any rate, so St. Hubert's Day is coming. Then my birthday, St. Martin's Day is... Oh, and by the way, my birthday is also not just my 60th. It's the 60th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's election as President of the United States. So if you live in Boston or Cape Cod or Palm Beach or Newport, Rhode Island, or any place associated with JFK, on my birthday, well, for instance, let's say you live near Palm Beach, Florida. Go to the Breakers, go to the bar, and have a picture of yourself taken there and send it in. If you're in Boston, go to the JFK Library. If you're out on the Cape, go to the JFK Museum out there, the Irish Wailing Wall. Anything like that, toss it in the mix. Anyway, so we've got the 11th is St. Martin's Day, which I love again. Goose will be served, but it's also in Britain and the Commonwealth Remembrance Day. It's Veterans Day in the United States. So wear that red poppy in honor of our glorious dead. That's a very good thing to do. Thanksgiving Day, we expatriates here at the school will probably, as we've done the last few years, have a buffet dinner, turkey. So that'll be good. Then you know what'll happen?
What?
November 30th. We're not going to do much about that. Well, actually, I'm lying. We usually do a little something. St. Andrew's Day, the patron of Scotland. So if your ears weren't shattered by all the hunting horns on St. Hubert's Day on November 3rd, set the eardrums up for the bagpipes on November 30th. And then comes Advent, and then we're in Christmas. So you see, we've got a lot to celebrate, old man.
Indeed. All right. Sounds good, Charles.
There are two other events that are very much on people's minds right now. The other event on November 3rd and a recent event having to do with Rome. And you know what I'm going to say about those two things here and now?
What?
Nothing.
Okay. All right.
I want to get that.
Wait, what?
I want to get that. I did want to get that down straight. You know why I'm not going to say anything about them?
Why?
How much am I able to do about them?
Uh, Nothing.
Whereas I can do something about all the other stuff I've been talking about. Notice the difference?
Yeah, I guess so. Wow,
Ah,
fancy that.
all right.
All right. So we just had a 40-minute pre-show, Halloween content, Halloween questions from patrons. If you'd like to watch that, just become a patron today. An announcement. So either next show or perhaps a couple shows from now, I want to do a Blessed Charles episode. So send in questions related to the book, and I'll ask them, patrons and non-patrons alike. I'm about halfway through it. I'm on page 130, and I'm developing a list of my own questions for Charles. So
I hope I have answers for them.
yeah, and
Charles, what country was Blessed Emperor Carl from? Well, no, don't tell me I can do this. Australia?
no.
Ah, okay.
The book is. I mean, excited to the episode because I find the book especially relevant, and people ask a lot of questions like, "Oh, how do I handle this problem in the church?" Or how do you mentally handle things, keep it all together? And in a strange way, I think this book provides an antidote when it comes to that, on how to handle these sorts of things and how to behave and how to live life. So I'm excited to give Charles the opportunity to expound on that in the Blessed Charles episode.
I actually, all joking aside, I actually have to agree with you on that simply because almost everybody and everything he knew betrayed him. Everything fell apart around him. But he never lost his faith. He never lost his sense of humor. And he never lost, and this is going to sound weird, he never lost his goodness. He never gave in to despair or hatred. I mean, just to give you one example of what I mean, most of the politicians, not all, of each of his peoples stabbed him in the back, one way or the other, by the end of his time in Austria. Horribly. And, beforehand, they'd constantly been pushing for their own people's spot. You read some of the correspondence of what the national leaders had to say about each other within Austria-Hungary. And honestly, sometimes it sounds like two kids fighting.
Mm.
It's, you think to yourself, everything's falling apart around them, and they're doing this stuff? They're subjecting this man to this garbage of theirs? Well, they did. And I can honestly say that if I'd been in his shoes, I'd have hated the people I had ruled. The peoples, plural. I'd have hated them. Instead, on his deathbed, he said repeatedly, I am suffering that my peoples might come back together. And believe me, he suffered. His deathbed was not fun. I am suffering that my peoples might come back together. He wanted the Eucharist. There was an altar set up in the room adjoining, and he had it set up so that he could see the tabernacle. And then, as he was dying that last day, he hadn't seen his oldest son for several days because of his rapid decline. But he had his wife bring him in, and he said, when she said, well, do you think it's wise? He said, yes. He needs to see how an emperor and a Catholic dies. And he did. And I can tell you, because I knew the man, that his son never forgot that. Not till he died himself back in 2011. So, or 2000, no, it was later than that. It was 2014, my mistake.
That's Otto?
No, it was Otto.
Yeah.
2011, 2012, 2011. All right, I was right. 2011. Yeah, it was Otto.
Um. Yeah. So reading this, one of the things that jumps out at me is the relatability of Charles in a strange way. Because even though it's a totally different time period and he comes from the Habsburgs and it's a totally different situation, it's the journey of a young man.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of parallels and there are a lot of emotional similarities that I think all young men go through, which I think Charles highlights. And our audience, primarily being young men, I think they would really enjoy this book particularly. So,
Well, that's very true. For you guys, and mind you, you're a little more aware of that than I am because I don't know how to tell you this. Are you seated? Vinny, you're younger than I am. I know, I know. We should have told you. We were looking for the right time. Anyway, uh, honestly, I could see where, gentlemen, if you're finding yourselves in a bit of a quandary about life, in Emperor Charles, you've got a friend who's been there and done that. And yeah, I think you're quite right. I hadn't thought of that. I've thought of other aspects of his character, but not that. But you're right. He's a good patron for young men who are trying to make their way in a world that's just going nuts. Because as you saw, it's not like everything was sweetness and light before. The storm clouds have been gathering around that clan for a long time, and there was so much built up tragedy. The reasons why he was heir to the throne were not happy.
right. Yeah.
You know, his great uncle, or not great uncle, I guess you would call him, his first cousin once removed, Crown Prince Rudolph, died very mysteriously. His uh, grandfather died. His uncle
He was like fourth
married.
in line to begin with when
Yeah,
he was born, right? Yeah, I remember
yeah,
that.
he was fourth in line, and then one by one, Franz Ferdinand married Morgan Attackley, so his kids weren't going to get it. And then his father died when he was pretty young,
Yeah,
in
of syphilis.
1904, I think. What's in syphilis? Yeah, I mean, and that was not a. And the funny thing about his father, also called Otto, uh, his father and mother were very different people. They were very ill-suited. His mother was very devout, very pious, but very dour. So much so that her husband called her the nun. The husband, on the other hand, his father, they called him Schönster Otto, most beautiful Otto. He was very handsome, very jolly, easy to get along with, great sense of humor, real eye for the ladies, and the ladies had an eye for him, hence the syphilis. Um, and in a time that was kind of, well, rather more straight-laced than we are, because he was so good-natured and so much fun, Vienna forgave him all of his sins and peccadillos. Viennese society couldn't find itself able to condemn him simply because he was so much fun. They loved him. So this was not a well-suited couple. But Karl loved them both, his oddly matched parents, and he got really the best out of both of them, and
Mm-hmm.
not the worst. He from his mother he got this deep piety, this deep devotion, but not the dourness. And from his father he got the easy manner, the sense of humor, the devil may care attitude, but not the promiscuity. And what makes him such an attractive figure, a little bit like Fossati, the Italian youth who was recently beatified. Uh, One of the things that they have in common was that, on the one hand, being a lot of fun, very much men's men on the one hand, but on the other hand, being really devout. And today we're told that to be devout, you've got to be kind of a sissy on the one hand and kind of a annoying
stick in the mud.
Yeah. I mean, being kind of a sissy stick in the mud is sort of a weird mix. It's hard for me to think of it. Kind of like, I don't know, Paul Lynde is a Puritan or something. But at any rate, it is an amazing story. And I have to say, even though I've written the biography and it's out now and all that, I'm still very much in awe of his character and of the role he played. And I'm not at all surprised. They just dedicated his 16th shrine in the United States in rural Jasper, Georgia. Go figure. Oh, one more thing I completely forgot to mention. Nothing to do with Kaiser Karl, and nothing to do with either the upcoming American excitement or the Holy See's amusements of the past week. But there is something I do want to spout on.
Okay.
Canada. Two things this past week. Now, mind you, I have a lot of interest in Canada. You see the French-Canadian flag over my head. But to all of my Canadian friends, be assured you send me a Canadian red ensign, I'll put it up. Just make sure that the maple leaves are green and not red in the coat of arms, just so you know. Anyway, although I'm lying, if you send me one that's got red leaves, I'll put that up. I'll take anything. I'm not particular. But the two things of this: one, our wokeness in America with the pulling down of the statues, the dropping of names, and all this garbage. It's so stupid. It's really stupid in America, but it's even stupider in Canada. And Queen's University's law school is dropping the name of the father of Confederation, Sir John A. Macdonald. For what? Because they're stupid. Spelt Stoopyd. Stupid. Yeah, that's how you spell it when you're a big stupid dum-dum. So all my Canadian friends up there, you send a letter to the Queen's University Law School and tell them they need to stop accepting any money from the government because it was founded by that evil Sir John A. Macdonald. And if they take any more government money, they're worthless scumbag hypocrites. You can tell them I said so. And my ancestors first came in 1607. So that's... And speaking of my fellow French-Canadian, only who's got a lot less French-Canadian blood than I do, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, she is the other great creature to talk about. It was pointed out to me this week that he's always got earphones when he speaks in Parliament. Now, here's the problem. Justine is perfectly fluent in both English and French. The only reason why an MP uses those things is for translations, if he doesn't know one or the other language. Rumor has it that Justine, because he doesn't need it for translation, gets his instructions when he's asked a question he doesn't understand. He needs help, a lot of assistance, because he's not too bright. The thing about poor Justin Trudeau is that while he did inherit his father's morals, he inherited his mother's brains, which is very sad.
So basically like the opposite of Blessed Charles. He's like the anti-Charles.
Oh!
Like how Charles took the good aspects and deleted the bad aspects of his parents, and Justin Trudeau is literally the opposite.
He's like Charles. He's like my Oswald Dupree.
That's slander.
What, for Oswald or Justine?
Oswald.
Well,
Same team, Charles.
What?
We're all a big family in the Tumbler House Corporation.
Yeah, and some of us are the idiot nephew. You know, in the Tumbler House family, the weird relative that we hide when neighbors come to call is Oswald. By the way, speaking of which, you're going to be seeing him before you see me.
Why is that?
Why do you think? He doesn't have the money to stay in Copenhagen, so he's moving back home. Even selling off, or trying to sell off, that was the sad part. He tried to sell off most of his John Travolta memorabilia collection. You know how much he was able to sell?
How much?
Nothing. Nobody wanted it. But there's good news for you. Not only is his collection remaining intact because he couldn't sell the garbage, you're getting stuck with the bill to transport it back to America. Don't thank him.
Well.
Hey, you keep him on payroll. It's your problem, pal, not mine. I realize you hold him over my head, but there's a price to pay for pulling that kind of a deal. You employ him, you pay for him. So even as we speak, down at the docks in Copenhagen, a whole bunch of cruddy 70s John Travolta garbage is being stuffed in a what do they call those things they put on ships?
I think you have the wrong impression of the nature of the relationship. You seem to think that when someone is indebted to me, that I suffer. When I hold your debt, I don't suffer. You suffer.
What has he got you could possibly use? I mean, look, if I was in debt to you and the collateral were 5,000 pairs of double knit bell bottoms from 1973, okay, I'd be in debt. You know what? Go ahead. Seize the collateral.
Look, there are things, okay? You have to get creative, but look, I've learned from relatives on the streets of Philadelphia, okay? There are many different avenues you can explore.
Yeah, I remember your Uncle Giovanni. He gave me quite the education back in the day. Oh, and by the way, that's another thing.
What?
I never ran numbers for your uncle.
Okay.
This whole thing that I was a runner for them when I was a kid, I don't know who's coming up with this crap, but it's not true. My relationship with your family was always of a non-business nature until I started writing.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't go on runs with Uncle Giovanni. Occasionally, there'd be like field trips.
Yeah.
I was a kid in school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He'd take you to some ball games.
Yeah, exactly. The ball games, prize fights, toll booths. Anyway, no, I mean it was all on the up and up.
That's good.
Oswald, on the other hand, there was a guy who ran numbers. You know what? I think you probably keep him on the payroll out of sentiment. A sentimental Franchini. There's something a real first. I gotcha. You keep him on the payroll out of sentiment. Go ahead. You look, it humanizes you. It does.
I mean, what can I say? I'm very merciful.
You're a sentimental guy. I think you know what? That's beautiful.
All right.
I'm touched. Right here.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. Do we have any memes?
Yes, we do. Memes of production time.
Nationalize the memes of production.
For the common good. Okay, first one is a comment on one of our last videos from Liebheis. Tumbler House does not have slaves. They just have hardworking employees who can't leave and are paid in food and housing, and the tower even offers free clothes, albeit in the aesthetic form of the 50s versions of the job they are in.
Absolutely. That guy knows. He knows your employment plan. Plus, what he left out is the fact that if they can't quit, they can't be fired either, as we see with Oswald.
All right, next one is from Babylon B. This is kind of an oldie but a goodie that I think will especially please Charles. Opinion. We tried Republican, then we tried Democrat, then we tried Republican, then we tried Democrat, then we tried Republican. Is it time we try Democrat? What say you, Charles? Where do you weigh in on either Republican or Democrat? What do you think is going to fix this nation for good?
Well, either one of them can fix the nation for good. There's no doubt about that. It'll be fixed for good, all right. I think that's very definitely in the cards. No, I think that voting is a textbook example of doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different every time. I mean, again, I don't want to go into the election too much, except to say that, I mean, obviously, if Harris is elected, it'll be very peculiar. If the Trumpster is elected, then, of course, the Antifa types and all that are swearing up and down that they'll keep up the pressure and push him out. There's talk of secession. This moron in the New Republic has said it's time to scrap the Constitution. I can imagine how that would work. With the Looney Tunes, morons, and mental munchkins that would be in charge of that kind of a pony show. And of course the get rid of the Electoral College so that the country is no longer dominated by states dominated by white males. Okay. How about before you do that, you stop using anything invented by a white male? How about that? This woke stuff is really, really driving me around the bend. And I got to tell you quite seriously, ladies and gentlemen, and some of you may be feeling this way. Got to watch it. I'm feeling radicalized. I really am. I read this stuff and I want to shoot somebody. Let's fall into that trap. Let's do that. Let's keep our wits about us. You recall I was mentioning this to you before the show, that when they burned Mission San Gabriel, if the persons responsible had fallen into my hands, I probably would have shot him dead right there. And that would not have been a good thing, especially if the people I shot weren't guilty. Times like these, ladies and gentlemen, often call forth the worst in us, and we have to try to avoid being dominated by it. See, at the end of the day, there's no real freedom in corporate actions. You're part of a mob. The real freedom is an individual conscience. That's where you're free. That's where you have control. You don't have control over anything else. You don't have any control over the Pope or the President or anybody. You have control over yourself. When I'm unhappy about things in church and state, I pray more. I go to Mass. I watch old movies. I do anything and everything I can to escape their rule in my head. Now, that may sound a bit escapist, but I'll tell you a little funny story. When I was young, LA came really well equipped with all sorts of survivors of Nazi and communist camps. Did you know how they survived? Keeping free in their heads. That's how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. That's how Kaiser Karl did it, really. He relied on God and I can't say he didn't trust anyone else, but he didn't depend on anyone else. So while he was betrayed constantly, He never gave in to hatred. And that's something that we all have to try to fight. It's so easy, and there's so much to hate. Even Justine Trudeau is kind of an attractive object of dislike. We got to avoid it. Got to avoid it. Got to stay sane inside insanity.
And one of the ways we do that is by praying, including saying the rosary, which includes saying the Our Father. If we think about the words we are actually saying, right? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Yep.
Don't just sing song that. You know what I mean? Don't just tune out and just, mouth the words. You see? That's there precisely for us to be able to handle the situation.
Yeah. And our Lord went through worse. I mean, you talk about betrayal, you talk about everything. Our Lord's already been there and done that. And you'll find that figures from St. Joan of Arc to Blessed Carl, who have been wildly betrayed, they trod the same path. And nothing, ladies and gentlemen, that you and I are suffering now compares remotely to what either our Lord or any of those saints I mentioned went through. So we've always got to try to, get a grip. Get a grip. And the only thing we can really get a grip on is ourselves. Because we sure can't control anything else.
All right. We have one more meme.
What do we got?
From Eternal Memory TV, a very popular Catholic memes thing on Facebook, I believe. But so this is Father Mitch Pacwa on EWTN. He didn't actually say this, but Eternal Memory translated this to say that he's saying, one can actually cultivate a sort of medieval piety by having no idea what His Holiness in Rome is doing.
Yes, I pray for the Pope, and that's all you need to do. Very medieval. I'm all for it. There was back in the 80s, they had this campaign on CBS, The More You Know. Okay. Do you remember that? And then they'd have some, it was based on the Bicentennial Minute, I think back in the 70s, but you'd have some star say, toss out some random factoid.
Yeah.
And then the more you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we could do a similar thing, only it would be the less you know.
Definitely.
Yeah. It'd be tremendous. And I guess you wouldn't toss out a factoid because that would be teaching someone something. I guess what you might do is throw out something nobody could possibly know. Like the number of stars in the galaxies. The less you know. Or Bigfoot's first name. The less you know.
Yep. All right. Time for the questions finally.
Oh, this is what you all come for, I know.
Everybody's loving this episode so far, I'm sure. It's, what is it, probably like 45-minute mark or so that we're finally get to the questions. That's what the people like. They like these nice long episodes.
That's amazing. I'd want to zip through them if I were them, but I'm not them, so I'll do as I'm told.
All right. First question is from Cal.
Okay.
Hello, Vincent and Charles. I'm relatively new to the Off the Menu podcast, and I've enjoyed the content greatly thus far, along with the 2 books that I've ordered from Tumblr House. My Halloween-related question for Charles is this. I have heard 2 conflicting origin stories for the American tradition of Halloween. While I'm aware that Halloween is the eve of All Hallows' Day, I consistently hear that the American tradition is derived from the Celtic practice of Samhain, as a result of the 19th century Irish immigration. Is the practice of Halloween in the United States derived more from the Catholic holiday of All Hallows or the Celtic festival Samhain? God bless you both and have a happy Hallowtide.
Well, that's a very good question. And the answer is both, in the sense that the old Celtic rites of Samhain were Christianized, rather like some of the stuff we do for Christmas and so forth, Christmas tree and mistletoe and holly and all that. So it was pretty thoroughly Christianized in England, Scotland, and Ireland. And then in England, it died out because of the Reformation, but it survived in Scotland and Ireland. Um, the pranks, the fortune telling, the games, the bobbing for apples, all that stuff. That came to us from Catholic times in Ireland and Scotland. And yes, it came over. One of the things they did, though, was the jack-o'-lanterns, which in the old country were carved from turnips. And don't ask me how they did that. I don't know. But I've seen pictures. I've never actually seen a jack-o'-lantern carved from a turnip. But the pumpkins really did a lot better for carving. And that is what made it distinctively American, was the pumpkin. But one of the other customs that you don't hear about anymore that the Irish brought over was that on Halloween they would eat colcannon, which is a mixture of mashed up potatoes and cabbage, sometimes carrots, and a lot of butter. And colcannon was a standard Irish dish, not just on Halloween, but on all of the eves of major feast days. And that's because up until Vatican II, the eves of major feast days were days of fast and abstinence. So the reason why the Irish eat colcannon on Halloween is because it was the Eve of All Saints. But although the Eve itself didn't have quite the same weirdness, shall we say, that it did in Ireland, in other countries, they had nights like that. May Eve, St. John's Eve, and so on, some of which were in Ireland as well. Bonfires were a big part of the Irish Halloween, the Scots Halloween. And they were in America, too. If you've ever seen the film Meet Me in St. Louis, there's a really good view of how Halloween was around 1904. And it was kids building big bonfires and also pulling tricks. Trick or treat used to be no idle threat.
Seems like holidays in America in the around the turn of the century were pretty rowdy.
Yeah. Well, Americans were pretty rowdy back then.
4th of July.
Yep.
It's interesting.
Washington's birthday. Oh, yeah. Well, see, back then, Americans because we had no freedom back then. What?
No,
we had no freedom then. Everybody was oppressed. Women, people of color, animals, everybody was oppressed. And nobody could do anything. So as a result, the celebrations of the holidays were a lot rowdier. Now they could be canceled if we're not wearing our masks. And as you know, in the city of LA, the mayor can cut off water and power to any party house. I can imagine how that would have got over in 1914 Los Angeles. They'd have burned him in effigy, or maybe not in effigy. They might have just burned him. Here, Mr. Mayor, want a Halloween bonfire? Woo! Anyway, so there you go. Yeah, it did become kind of rowdy. It's true.
Okay. Question from John Paul.
Okay.
Does Charles have general tips to give on how to carve a pumpkin? Are there jack-o'-lantern mistakes one should avoid? And what does Charles think is the best thing to carve into a jack-o'-lantern?
Well, let's take the last question first. Not a turnip. And not radishes. I think the idea of carving radishes into jack-o'-lanterns is ridiculous. But the biggest pumpkin you can get, that's what you want. And what you want to do is to spread out newspaper on the floor and get yourself 2 knives, a big one and a small one for cutting details. One of the big mistakes people try to do is getting too artsy. Really and truly, to my way of thinking, the standard good old way of doing a jack-o'-lantern is just fine. 3 triangles cut into it. 2 for the eyes, 1 for the nose, and then a big toothy grin. That's what you want. And of course, first thing you do is you cut a circle on the top. You pull off the stem, but keep it. Cut off the seeds and whatnot. Set it aside. Scoop out all the pulp and seeds. Some people like to roast the seeds. Unfortunately, our pumpkins are bred. I mean, fortunately, in the sense that it's less gooey. But there's very little pulp now in most of the pumpkins as you'll get to carve. So you might roast the seeds, and they're tasty. But as far as the pulp goes, you're not going to make a pie out of it. There just isn't enough stuff there. But you scoop all that out. Then you cut in your 3 triangles and your toothy grin. You put in a votive candle, not blessed, of course. Light it. You put that top back on it. And presto changeo. There is your jack-o'-lantern. Ready to terrorize the night.
I will add one tip that's important for me. Draw the face before you cut it. You've got to mark it up. You want to see the thing before you know what I mean? You're not trying to create art as you cut, you know.
I left that out, but you're right. Do use a pen to draw the triangles and the mouth. But yes, that's absolutely true, absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And you've got the newspaper spread, so all the guff can go on it.
Yeah.
Then you can roll it up and toss it unless you want to roast the seeds. But you're going to have your jack-o'-lantern. And oh, do I love jack-o'-lanterns.
Man, you'd love this one show. Well, maybe you'd hate this show. It's called Outrageous Pumpkins. It's a 4-part series. The contest of doing jack-o'-lanterns. These people take this to a whole new level. I don't know if it was on Food Network or something like that. But...
Oh, you see them with all these weird curly cues cut into them and all that.
Too much for you?
You know, spare me. 3 triangles and the mouth. That's what you want.
All right.
And I gotta tell you, with that candle in there burning in the night. Oh, and by the way, this Halloween, it's gonna be a full moon.
Wow.
The last time was, I think, 12 years ago or something like that. The next time will be 2035. Well, I'll be 75 years old. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. Next question is from Anne.
Okay.
I'm really enjoying Sean Leslie's Ghost book very much. So far, my favorite story is the one about the priest insisting on his rights. His coffin floats down the aisle in the church, supported by nothing. The spirit of the priest is satisfied only when on the following night his successor finally gives him the blessing at the foot of the altar. What's your favorite story?
Well, I like the one best about the ghost of the priest in the rectory in East Plumstead, who kept on showing up after he died for decades. And finally, a new pastor came in and said, all right, in the name of Almighty God, what do you want? And he pointed at a book in the library and vanished. The priest pulled open the book and saw a list of masses that had been paid for but never said by the priest because he got in hospital and died. So he said all the masses plus an extra one for the priest's soul, and the ghost was never seen again. I also like the one about the fellow at the Brompton Oratory, priest, who was summoned by an old lady who said, oh, there's someone dying in this house. You've got to see him. So he follows her. He gets there, and then she vanishes. He rings the doorbell. The fellow answers it and says, I understood you were dying. He says, oh, no, I'm fine. He says, well, that's strange. And they talked. Turned out he was a fallen away Catholic and so on. And then he sees a picture on the wall, and it's the old lady. And says, well, that was the woman who brought me here. And he laughed and said, well, that can't be. That's my mother. She's been dead for, X number of years. And he said, well, I don't know. So the fellow agreed that he could come back and he would talk to him about the faith. And then the priest left. And you can guess what happened. When he came back the next day, the man had died in his sleep.
Yeah. I remember that one.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me personally, it seems like the book, like Sean Leslie organized the book purposefully so that there's a sense of progression, at least to me, where the stories get more and more scary and intriguing as you go along. And honestly, to me, the climactic part of the book is the last story. I mean,
we can't tell it.
I can't tell it, but it will stay with you. I mean, the last two stories, I mean, the second to last story is actually, in my opinion, too scary to portray on TV. You can't do that. But then the last story is, it's a very special story. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. That's my favorite story, the very last one. All right. Question from Todd.
Okay, Todd.
Dear Charles, I'm a somewhat recent convert whose Catholic Halloween experience is limited. Before conversion, one of my favorite things to do was watch horror movies during the month of October. However, they were mostly of the modern variety, full of grisly death and nudity. The past two Halloweens, I have foregone this tradition due to the aforementioned content problems, but really miss it. What are some Halloween scary movies Charles particularly likes that he can recommend for me to watch instead?
Well, there are several. Firstly, Universal's wonderful old horror movies from the 30s have yet to be beaten. I'm talking about Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Werewolf of London, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Nosferatu?
No, that wasn't Universal, but yeah, Nosferatu was pretty scary. And also the Edgar Allan Poe inspired films with Vincent Price from the early 60s. Those are fun. And occasionally very scary. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death. The Raven is kind of a comedy, but fun to watch. And let me see. Some of the English television programs from the 70s, like Thriller, that are on TV now. Not TV, on computer now, on YouTube or whatever it is. Those are good. The Hammer films, the early ones, but they started to get into real violence and nudity as they went further along, which is why in the end, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee stopped making them. So, The House on Haunted Hill, of course, with Vincent Price. Those are all. Oh, and then of course, never forget either The Twilight Zone or Night Gallery, One Step Beyond, or The Outer Limits.
Okay. Yeah, I never really had a tradition of watching stuff for Halloween or getting in a Halloween mood, except for when I was really young, 10 or so. Disney had such a cool sort of assortment of Halloween things. I remember they called Disney's Halloween Treats. And it was all these cartoons. And they did a really, really, such a good cartoon version of The Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane. It was so scary.
They did a very fine version of that. Yeah, very definitely.
And they took, I remember for part of it, they would take the scarier parts of Fantasia, the real dark elements, and they would incorporate that, and that felt appropriate. It was just part of the old Disney that But they didn't make that in the 90s. I'm pretty sure those cartoons were done probably when Walt was alive.
Yeah,
The ones
the
that I were
cartoons are
watching.
quite old. I mean, Walt, he had a very, what's the word I want? He had a very vivid imagination, and some of it was pretty dark.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
of it was pretty dark indeed. So yeah, I would. Well, I think that pretty
Yeah.
much sums it up for that.
Yeah.
Good viewing. Enjoy yourself.
All right. Question from someone. It's submitted through YouTube comments. This person with the alias Heart, and she says, "Seems to me that in Catholicism of the British Isles, children going door to door asking for treats on the eve of a holiday was a very common practice. At Christmas, obviously, there was wassailing or caroling. Oh, bring us a figgy pudding. ... I read about Lent crocking, where children would go around on Fat Tuesday asking for pancake fixings, and if they didn't get any, they might throw old chipped crockery at your door. So, with these practices documented, why has trick-or-treating or souling fallen out of favor in American Catholic circles? And why is it so hard to find history on this? If I can find a historical context for Lent crocking, why is it that when I look up trick-or-treating, it's a strictly American practice, or a mockery of Catholicism in England, or some sort of pagan or satanic nonsense? I ask this as a mother of 9 young children who gets grief for trick-or-treating every year.
All right. Well, I'll tell you. Souling, going door to door around New Year's around All Saints and All Souls, it was a very old custom in the British Isles. It died out in England as a result of the Reformation, and it was replaced to a great degree in England with Guy Fawkes Night. And people would, instead of going around offering to pray for goodies, they would go around asking for pennies for the guy so they could build an effigy of Guy Fawkes, which was definitely anti-Catholic. In America, the souling custom never took root itself, although it was hovering in the background, as you might say, especially the Irish and Scots who brought Halloween. What did come with them was Mischief Night, and people would basically turn it into a kind of extortion. Trick or treat. If you didn't give them a treat, then you'd be very sorry. They do funny things like take all your trash cans and put them on your roof. Well, stealing gates was another fun thing. So, very much in the 20s and 30s, the custom of trick-or-treating as we know it was introduced, making it purely treat and no trick at all. And that was a great relief for a lot of people in a lot of places. But nevertheless, the resemblance to souling was not lost on Catholic people in those early days of its revival. And some of them made an attempt to turn it back into souling. I myself do this. When I'm living at home, I put little notes in the bags of goodies I put together, asking the prayers for my dead from the trick-or-treaters. And since a lot of them in my neighborhood are Mexican, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And, they'll come back every year and saying, oh, we prayed for your dead. I think, thank you very much. Then here are your candies for this year. Don't forget to pray for them this year. We won't. And off they go. So if I had children of my own and was sending them out trick-or-treating, then when I got them back, I would have them pray for the deceased of all the people who had given them candy.
Seems like souling would be something that's big in Louisiana all the time,
Well, it would be, but as in Europe, in Louisiana, All Saints and All Souls take precedence, and people flock to the cemeteries.
I see. And so it kind of got crowded out.
Well, it never really got established because the French custom of the cemeteries
I see.
always dominated.
Interesting. Okay.
There's no reason you can't do both, and some people do.
Right. A question from Michael. As a
Okay.
baby boomer who evidently grew up appreciating classic horror and science fiction, were you a reader of the magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland? As an Angelino, did you ever meet its editor, Forrest J. Ackerman, or visit his famed Acker Mansion, which housed his collection of movie props and posters?
The answer to all those questions is yes, yes, and yes. I I sure did. I grew up reading Famous Monsters of Filmland, no doubt about it. I didn't meet Forey until very late in his life, maybe about, 10 years ago. I made 2 trips to the Acker Mansion. One was in the company of the illustrious Bill Biersack, author of The Darkness Did Not. We both went in morning coats to Forey's utter delight. And then the second time I went by myself. That time I wore a regular pinstripe suit, but with wing collar, gray spats, and a bowler hat. Now, when you would go to the Acker Mansion, you'd have to call, you'd make a reservation. And then at 10 a.m. on the Saturday appointed, you'd show up. And there'd be some other people who were doing the same thing you were doing, because he would tell you when to show. So on the second night, the second time around, the second morning, it was 10 a.m., but it was January, and it was cold and drizzly and really gloomy as all get out. And there were about 10 other people, none of whom I knew and who didn't know each other. So, but I was in front, so I ring the doorbell, and Forey opens it up, and he goes, "Yes." And I took my bowler hat off my head, and I said, I'm terribly sorry, sir, but our automobile broke down up the road, and we were wondering if we might use your telephone to summon assistance." And he said, "Oh, yes, do come in."
Wow.
But Forrest Ackerman was one of the earliest agents for writers like Ray Bradbury and so on who dealt with that kind of thing. He was also one of the pioneers of science fiction, horror, and fantasy fandom. And when I say pioneers, I mean he got started in this stuff in the 1930s. So he knew everybody. He knew Bela Lugosi, he knew Boris Karloff, he knew everyone. And they all gave him stuff. So his house was a shrine to that kind of movie memorabilia. And he, Ray Bradbury, and Ray Harryhausen, the special effects man, were the fathers of the Los Angeles Science Fiction Society, LASFS, which when they began, they met at Clifton's cafeteria in the basement. And they would drink water and iced tea and lemonade, and nobody had any money. So they just talked about science fiction, horror, and fantasy for hours. Well, I had the chance, and I will always be annoyed with myself for not doing it. I had the chance to see Forey and the 2 Rays together at a bookstore in Glendale, maybe 20 years ago. And something came up, I couldn't go. Man, do I wish I'd made myself go. To see those 3, probably one of the last times that they were all together, would have been great. Anyway, I hope that answers your question from Boomer World.
All right, question from Anthony.
All right.
Happy Halloween, Mr. Coulombe and Mr. Franchini. Before my question, I must say that I've been reading Blessed Charles of Austria, a Holy Emperor and his legacy, and have been enjoying every word. I have one question for you on this hallowed night. As I live in the formal capital of the Confederacy, I would like to hear if Mr. Coulombe has anything to say about Confederate ghosts and Civil War era ghosts in general, be it in Virginia or throughout the South.
Oh, heavens. Well, the South is definitely a haunted country. There's a website called The Moonlit Road, which is dedicated to Southern ghost stories. There's even a genre of literature in American literature called Southern Gothic. Because, I realized we're supposed to hate the Confederacy and all that, and it's all evil and terrible, and it was all about oppressing slaves and treason, and it was all terrible. Okay, great. But, having said that, the experience of defeat, the destruction wreaked upon the South, and the experience of Reconstruction created in the South a sense of tragedy that doesn't really exist in the rest of the country. And the terrible, terrible battles, you got to bear in mind that most of the Civil War was fought on Southern soil. Very little of it was fought in the North. Pennsylvania, Maryland, which is hardly north, a raid in Vermont. But the bloodiest war in this country's history was for the most part fought in the South. Thousands upon thousands of young men and some women on both sides died. Well, that's precisely the kind of atmosphere, coupled with the whole Moonlight and Magnolias thing, that breeds stories of haunting. I don't know of a Civil War battlefield that doesn't have people claiming that it was haunted. And then again, the end of a whole way of life, that too produces a lot of drama. And when you have historical drama, you have ghosts. What is billed as the most haunted house in the nation is a plantation home called the Myrtles in Louisiana. I forget the particulars, but there are a bunch of spirits who have supposedly been seen there. I mean, like New England, like the Hudson Valley and the area around Philadelphia, the South is both ghost and legend haunted. Of course, Flannery O'Connor made the observation about the South in her wonderful essay, The Catholic Writer in the Protestant South, that the South may not be Christ-loving, but it is Christ-haunted.
Mm.
And she said, rather, of course, even at that means he gets more attention in the South than the North. But at any rate, no, you're definitely Southern Gothic all the way. Keep the South ghostly.
Right.
Oh, one thing I neglected to mention too was, in addition to that kind of haunting and the white folklore, you've got a huge amount of black folklore, hoodoo and conjure and all sorts of things, plaid eyes, all sorts of black legendary in the South, which is also very much a part of the heritage, the haunted heritage of that part of the world. There was a fellow in South Carolina. His name escapes me. What I remember is his title, the High Sheriff of Beaufort County. And he, after the war, he came back to his hometown in South Carolina, in Beaufort County. He decided he wanted to be sheriff. Well, the problem was that at the time, the blacks in Beaufort County were very much afraid of a conjure doctor named Dr. Hook. That was his nickname. I forget his real name. Well, when the sheriff became sheriff, he found that it was impossible to get people to testify if Dr. Hook had been hired to keep them from doing so, because they were afraid that he would cast some sort of conjure on them. So, the High Sheriff of Beaufort County made an intensive study of the whole art of conjure as it was practiced in that part of the world in those days. And he became an adept at it. So much so that even Dr. Hook came to fear him. And after that time, they had no more trouble with tampering with the jury pools in Beaufort County or with witnesses. And he wrote a book all about his experiences. How did I find out about this stuff? Well, before I read the book, I first heard about it in interesting book about murder in Savannah, Georgia, called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
They turned that into a movie. Kevin Spacey's in that.
They sure did, and it sure is. But the book has a quick reference.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, they go to the cemetery to do the conjuring. I saw that.
For Goofer
And
Dust.
yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But you're saying the sheriff turned into this serious conjurer?
Well, it was the only way he could break the power of this other guy over the blacks in the county.
Was he Christian before that?
Yeah. Some sort of Protestant. Well, he considered himself a Christian. How much he really believed in it is another issue. But he was able to impress them with his abilities.
Oh, that's too bad. It seems like there were various alternatives he could have chosen other than conjuring.
Maybe so, but I'm not a Baptist living in 1945 Beaufort County, South Carolina.
That sheriff was not in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
No,
but
his opponent was.
I thought it was a woman.
The woman was the widow of Dr. Hook.
Oh. Interesting. Okay.
Or ex-girlfriend or something. Anyway, it was, see, Beaufort County, if you remember how the shape of South Carolina and Georgia, Savannah is across the river from South Carolina. And Beaufort County is there.
Okay.
But that's a kind of a weird tale, huh?
Yeah. You don't hear a lot of that.
No, I guess not. Oh, gosh.
It's like a movie almost. It's like, I don't know, some sort of anti-hero movie. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, well, I have to fight evil with evil. So I'm going to, become evil to save all these people. But I'm going to lose my soul in the process. But I'm going to save all these... it sounds like a modern movie nowadays,
Well, it does. It sure does. His name, wait a minute, I know his name. It was James McTeer. McTeer is the Scots name.
He was Scottish?
Descent.
Huh.
Scottish descent.
Okay. Next question is from Andrew. Dear Charles, I stumbled across Lord Halifax's ghost book in a bookstore some time ago, and I've enjoyed it immensely. Some of the stories are actually so dry that I can't help but believe they're true. Who is Lord Halifax, and why did he compile a book of ghost stories?
Well, there are two famous Lord Halifaxes, father and son, of which he was the father. Lord Halifax was a wealthy English nobleman based in Yorkshire. He was a very, very devout and active Anglo-Catholic, head of the English Church Union and that kind of thing. And he was the Anglican side of the Malene conversations about reunion between Anglicanism and Rome. He was very much a papalist. And he was, as I say, he was the leading Anglo-Catholic layman in England in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. That was Lord Halifax. Now, his son, also Lord Halifax, was a very interesting character. He was Viceroy of India, and then he became Foreign Minister under Neville Chamberlain, and he was in the running for Prime Minister against Winston Churchill. He lost, and so Churchill eventually appointed him to be ambassador to Washington. And he is both Halifaxes I have a great deal of respect for. But the younger Lord Halifax shared his father's religious convictions, and so they called him the Holy Fox in terms of his politicking.
Oh, wait a minute. That's the guy from, I'm having
Finest Hour?
What did you say? Darkest Hour. That's right. It's that Halifax?
That's the son of the fellow who collected the ghost stories.
Wow, I can't believe I didn't make that connection. That okay, so they're big timers then. They're really
Yeah.
okay. Wow. Hmm.
And Lord Halifax's ghost book is a lot of fun.
What do you think about the dry comment?
Well, you see, the way he compiled his ghost book was he had friends tell him stories.
Hmm.
I think he actually had a book that he had people write them in, guests to his home.
Hmm.
So they reflect whoever wrote them. And most of his friends were not vivid writers. You know, they wrote what had happened as far as they could recall it.
I see.
And it was the inspiration, by the way, for Sir Sean Leslie's ghost book. He was a great friend of Lord Halifax.
Hmm.
If you remember the foreword, he talks about Lord Halifax's ghost book.
I see. Okay. Question from Jacqueline. Are vampires real? And if so, how are they the same or different than the conception of vampires in the popular imagination? P.S. I think reading The Darkness Did Not during the month of October would be a great way to usher in Halloween. P.S.S. Are you Pierre Bontemps, a character in the Father Baptist series,
Uh,
who is obviously French, and Bontemps is French for good times.
well,
So, yeah.
as far as the PPS goes, I would say, madam, you may say so, but I could hardly comment. I do believe that exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Pearl clutch. No, I have to admit that the depiction of the Knights Templar are very similar to a group of young men I knew when I was younger than I am now.
Hmm. Makes sense. What
Done the
about
chest.
what about vampires?
Well, there's a second question though in between the two.
Um,
The PS.
I think reading The Darkness Is Not during the month of October would be a great way to usher in Halloween.
Yes, me too. I think it'd be great.
Which so that's The Darkness Is Not is the second in the Father Baptist series, which Professor Biersack basically uses. I guess you could say Catholic lore on
Yeah,
vampire, right? So
yeah.
it's the
I
Catholic
mean,
take on vampires.
yeah, and he uses the actual folklore. You see, our vision of vampires is very much affected by Bram Stoker's novel Dracula and the movies that came out about it, of it, and so on. But that's not the vampire folklore. The vampire folklore, the vampire that people like Dom Austin Calmet and Leo Elatius and Montague Summers wrote about, is a very different kettle of fish. For them, the vampire is basically a possessed corpse. The only difference between that and a possessed human being that would be exorcised is that the human in question is dead. So, um, the vampire was simply a possessed corpse without a particle of his original personality. And very often, although they might bite and have you come back, in a lot of versions of the folklore, um, suicides might come back as vampires. Now, do such things exist? Well, like everything else I haven't experienced myself, it seems a little bit, shall we say, off the beaten path, from fairies to cryptids to God knows what. I can't say for sure. What I can say is that the literature is very suggestive. There was a wave of this kind of thing in early to mid 18th century Serbia, which was under Austrian control at that time. And the correspondence of the Austrian officials dealing with this stuff is kind of interesting because it's this very bureaucratic German, almost dull, with these reports about the number of the village reports that there's vampirism going on. So the local commander and his troops go there and they dig up bodies. X number are rotted, X number are not. They stake them. The body yelled and screamed, and blood came out. I mean, but it's all described in this bureaucratic, dull language that has. I mean, it's almost like you're talking about the number of envelopes they ordered. Which, just like the lady said earlier about Lord Halifax's ghost book, the dry ones sounding more real. These sorts of things sound more real precisely because they're so. Oh well, yes, we of the 8 bodies exhumed, 3 were in a vampiric condition, 4 showed signs of decay. Of the 3, we staked them. Cut off the head, and after the screaming, we cut off the heads. It's like, what?
Well, it's convincing because it's a person with no imagination, for one, where they're not trying to tell, a story, a tall tale. They're just recording a journal entry.
Yeah.
And number 2, it's business as usual. It sounds like, well, yeah, another day, couple more vampires.
Another vampire, yeah. And they don't seem. One of the things that you get in the novels and so forth about vampires is the idea of this overwhelming power they've got. But in these sorts of stories, the Emperor's men come into town, and they deal with it the way they would deal with a crime wave or a small insurrection. To the point, put it down, deal, we're out of here. And so, what was it? What were they experiencing then? I don't know. I wasn't there. There was a rash of vampirism in 19th century New England, which has often been attributed to tuberculosis and things like that. But, if you weren't there, it's very difficult to say. And even the people that were there had a hard time figuring out what was going on. But, as you've heard me say before, it's easier to prove that something exists than that it doesn't.
Were there any? So just playing devil's advocate on this,
Sure.
a thought occurred to me about Thomas à Kempis, where he was unfortunately prematurely buried, and not having the same type of medical science that we have today. I believe you told me that's a lot more common back then.
Yes, it sure was.
So,
and it could very well
yeah,
it could very well have contributed to it. What it would not have explained are these people. Premature burial would not explain their appearing to people.
Yeah, well, that's
or
what I was going to
attacking them.
ask. What exactly kind of documentation is there of, the actual actions outside of the grave?
Well, I mean, it's what would cause people to summon the constabulary. It's why these guys would get called in, was because, like the very famous case of a Serbian returnee called Arnold Paul. He died. He came back from the wars. He died, and then he began appearing and drinking people's blood, and people started sickening and dying. And then they called in the authorities, and the authorities dug him up and a number of his victims.
Why is he so special that his name? Was he in Serbia? Who's this person?
He was in Austria and Serbia, and his name sticks in my head because he was the very first of these kinds of accounts I ever read.
Oh.
Years ago.
I see.
That's why. There were others, but he's the one that I always think of, my go-to vampire.
Okay. Um. Yeah. Okay. Uh.
So to answer the question, I mean, like with this, as with all this other stuff, I've never been able to think, especially because you have stories of vampires from all over the world, all ages, vampire-like things. I have never been able to believe that with all the smoke, there's no fire at all. What the exact nature of that fire is, that's a whole other kettle of fish that I can't pretend to know.
Hmm. Okay. Last question for today is from Isaac. My wife and I are both educated traditional Catholics who share many of the same beliefs on topics such as morals, dogma, customs, and beliefs.
I like that in a married couple. It's terrible when you disagree on all those things.
I know. However, there has been one topic that has been a source of contention. That is on the reality of fairy folk.
Oh.
My wife, a Catholic school teacher and graduate of the Franciscan University of Steubenville, believes that stories that involve leprechauns, mermaids, etc., are the result of people's creative imagination and are not to be seen as literal. I, on the other hand, too often her chagrin, believe that there may be some literal truth to the beliefs of non human, non angelic intelligences on Earth. I was hoping you could provide me with an education on what Catholics and the Church have to say on the topic, and if you could recommend some authors or books on the topic, preferably Catholics.
Well, of course, my go-to guy here isn't the vampire Arnold Paul, but it's your personal favorite, Lodovico Sinistrare, Demoniality. But, accept no substitutes. Get the one with the foreword by Montague Summers, which is quite as useful as the rest of the book, because he deals with it from a, shall we say, more Western point of view. Not Western, more contemporary point of view. Well, you know, it's interesting. You look at people like Catherine Briggs, for instance, uh, collectors of tales of fairy lore. Uh, Almost inevitably, people end up becoming more or less believers in it when they really examine it. And I suspect it's because of what I've just said about the vampires. You have the same bloody motifs all over the world, unrelated cultures, same stories over and over and over again. It's very hard to believe that in all of that smoke, there's no fire. But again, I'm not in a position to tell you exactly what that fire is. I do suspect that if such creatures exist, then they would account for what we could consider the UFOs and so forth. That, in other words, if those creatures exist, they're not visitors from the stars, but from here. I don't pretend to understand it, but it seems to me that the facts, if there's any truth to it, that the fact is pretty much the way you explained it yourself. Another non-angelic, non-human race that shares this world of ours with us. And people have said to me, well, why isn't there more about them in the Bible? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. The argument which came up again in class last week about the sons of God and the daughters of men and their children, the Nephilim, the mighty men of old. Like everything else with this area, it's stuff that falls in between the cracks. And I can only say that if there's no mention of them in Revelation, no substantive thing, it's because really none of this is germane to our salvation. To put this another way, until the European Christians went to the mouth of the Congo River, they never knew there was a Congo River. Until they went up the Congo, they never knew there were gorillas or giraffes. They never knew about any of that stuff. They never knew about the American Indians until they came to the Americas. But you see, none of that was germane to their salvation. It was all stuff to be explored and discovered. But it isn't in Holy Writ. It isn't in Revelation. Because really, your saving your soul does not depend on whether or not there are fairies, whether or not there's a Congo River, whether or not Nix Olympica on Mars is in fact the tallest mountain in the solar system. Your salvation does not depend upon that. But it is interesting to speculate about. In all likelihood, until the end of the world, nobody will really know for sure. What is certain, however, and not because the veil between the worlds is thin this time of year, which is said so often it's become a cliche. Did I tell you? I looked it up, 25,000 examples of it. Well, what is certain is that the devil exists and his minions exist, and that the sacramentals keep them at bay. That's one thing we know. The church knows how to keep off the dock. The other thing we know is that the souls of the dead require prayer for their repose. The month of the Holy Souls is coming up. There's good evidence, one thinks of the Purgatory Museum in Rome, to suggest that sometimes they can come back from purgatory for specific purposes. It's a good time of year to familiarize yourself with that. Gather your sacramentals while ye may, your scapulars and your St. Benedict medals, holy water, blessed candles from Candlemas. Turn your homes and your persons into safe spaces, not like the stupid ones in the daycare centers they call universities now. No. Safe spaces from the dark. And centers of prayer for the dead. Remember that the dead can't pray for themselves, but they can pray for you and help you now. So take advantage of that two-way traffic. And above all, from all of us here, from me here in Austria, and from Vincent, the entire crowd at the Tumbler House Tower, up to, doubtless, including the 13th floor people where it's always Halloween. I think we can all wish you a very
happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. And ladies and gentlemen, one thing I should tell you before we go. In my family, we say that there are only 2 days of the year where we Coulombes can really be ourselves. Halloween and April Fools. The rest of the year we have to pretend. And we do. And so, I have a couple of questions for you before we shut down.
Sure.
Are you ready? Do you think you can take it?
Yes.
All right, fine. What is it if it's Monday?
It's off the menu.
What about the soul you save?
It may be your own.
God bless. Happy Halloween.